Hjälpes mig, Magnavine, du våg, Kaljud. God morgen, my friends, and happy Tuesday to you. I hope today finds you in good health. In our ever quest to find joy, to find harmony, peace, love. Before we get started today, I want to definitely call out New Reality TV. For those of you who haven't had a chance to check it out, I can't strongly encourage it enough. Check it out, newrealitytv.com. Consider subscribing for a absolute plethora of perspectives about our spiritual journey. Each one of ours is unique and different and precious. Each of these mini shows that are there on New Reality offer us a different glimpse of our spiritual connection, our spiritual path, our spiritual journey. So check them out, newrealitytv.com. In addition, I want to call out my very good friend at farnorthtinctures.com. For those of you who use herbal remedies, and sometimes we get a little behind and our tinctures are in the process or whatever, and you need a home remedy right now, check out her collection. She has a wonderful selection of products, whether it be tinctures or salves or teas or you name it, she has it. So check them out, check her out, check out her website, farnorthtinctures.com. You won't be disappointed. Finally, for those of you who do make your own home remedies and are always looking for the best herbs on the planet, I might advise you to check out Mountain Rose Herbs. They are the best for essential oils and herbs and spices, regardless whether using them for magical purposes, home remedies, or culinary purposes. All the above, check them out. All of these links can be found on my website, akulfhefnar.com. Today we're talking about the courage of tear, and we're saying, oh, I'm courageous, I'm brave, I'm this, I'm that, I'm that. Sometimes being courageous isn't external. It's not running into a burning building, although that is courageous. But sometimes the courage that we need is the courage to look intrinsically. Look at ourselves. Look at our beliefs, our values, our understandings. The courage to cast aside those behaviors and those masks that sometimes we feel compelled to use for inclusion into a society. I'm always reminded a very good friend of mine, a wonderful, wonderful man, but he's struggled for a very long time. He I guess came out back when it wasn't as acceptable, we'll put it that way, as it is now. And I spent, I would say, a good part of my high school days defending. I was his friend, and I wouldn't let anyone pick on him when I was close by. He's now grown up and has a life and of course has found things much more tolerable. And I say that in that from his perspective, certainly his behaviors and his definition of love is what it is. and it is beautiful, right? So, but anyway, during these earlier days I remember being a young man and standing up for him, and he wouldn't back down. He wouldn't denounce his feelings, his true self. Now, he wasn't one of those flaming individuals who are very flamboyant and very, very high visibility, we'll say. No, he was very low-key, very quiet. You wouldn't have known, really, unless you were a close friend. And of course, in high school, that time frame in our lives, sometimes we have a tendency to trust the wrong people, and in his case, these wrong people came back and decided to make trouble for him, and not realizing the ramifications, obviously, hopefully. But he held his ground. Now, we were never, we were good friends, and we were buddies, I guess, for better definition. And, there was no craziness. But one of the things is that I've looked back now at my life throughout the decades, is I realized what it took to be him in those days. Where many, or some, I shouldn't say many, I should say some, might be willing to say, okay, I denounce that, whatever, for sake of inclusion, for sake of, maybe even in his case, safety. Not being picked on, not being bullied, not being, assaulted. He could have said, no, that's baloney, right? That's hogwash. But he didn't. He never did. And to this day, now, of course, he's married to his husband, and I believe they've adopted a child, I believe. Wonderful parents, wonderful people, and still, to this day, wonderful person inside. Wonderful person. Even though, as we were growing up, the negativity, the negative energies, that must have just been everywhere for him, with small spots of brightness, right? What a life he must have led intrinsically, where his heart and his beliefs and his values wouldn't back down. They wouldn't surrender, even though surrendering would have led to many other reliefs in his life. These are the types of values that drive life, that drive our existence. That level of commitment, that level of understanding of who you are, and the sacrifice to stay true to who he was. As I look back on him, and I emailed him the other day because I was thinking about him, and I said, I am absolutely proud to have known you. I am thrilled to have known you and to have been there and watched and participated in some cases, in the protection. Sometimes that it took violence to protect him. And, I was willing to do that because he was a wonderful person. He was super intelligent. He was super warm. He was super friendly. And all these other people, all they saw was this one perspective of him, right? And they didn't even know him. A lot of these people who engaged in this activity didn't even know who he was as a person. They simply saw this framework out there and hung their hat on it, so to speak. But this is the level of courage that we need to have of our own values. Now, I'm not saying everyone has his same orientation or his same beliefs. What I am saying is the conviction that he has about his beliefs is the level of conviction that we should all embrace at being who we are, at being who we are inside. What do we love? What do we hold dear? What are our virtues? I'm always reminded when we're speaking of virtues of the 9 noble virtues of my ancestors who considered many different parts of their lives, but one of their biggest values was honor and truth, integrity. Down the food chain, so to speak, came courage, came industrialness, came hospitality, came these other things. But right at the top of the list was honor and truth. And I started thinking about that. And I remember as I've come to my ancestry and come into being whom I am and what I believe, how first and foremost now honor plays the biggest role in my life. I believe that honor and truth is something that we have to hold firm on. And one of those honors and one of those truths I have to accept is who I am and what I believe and how I believe it. I need to buckle that in, dial that in, that my actions and my thoughts become aligned with my heart, with what I feel, to become congruent, right? Living in my, what I call my authentic space, where I am truly being who I am, made to be. Many times we have a tendency to embrace those experiences that we've had in our lives, and we say, well, I was, an example would be when I was a younger man, I was a drywall taper. That's what they call them. And they're the people that put the paper and they make the walls really smooth so that paint can be applied. Put the fire tape on all the gaps. And that defined who many of my colleagues at the time saw me as. And then, of course, I found originally the monotheistic practice, and I received what I thought was the call. I began attending to my friends and those whom were referred to me, friends who were returning from combat tours in many different countries, returning home to a civilian life, or maybe still in the military. And I felt my congruence, but my authentic space wasn't complete yet. And as I further investigated, I learned more about my ancestry and that existence. My authentic space began to blossom. Now, in my case, and this is why I always talk about culture and bringing in the culture of the Norse, in my case, as I embraced the values of the Norse, as I embraced discovery of my ancestry, of my family, the culture of the Norse came through to me and helped me to discover more about myself. And equally important were my ancestors, were my great-grandparents, were my far-removed great-grandparents. And the more I discovered, the more I discovered about me, and where things started to make sense. It started to fit in my life. And I began to put all of those together until roughly about 12 years ago now. I'm trying to remember what year it is. Maybe a little bit before that. It struck me that this was where I belonged. That the feelings I had for the monotheistic practices were actually misguided at the time, and I needed to be identifying myself with my ancestry. And that brought me the closure that I needed for many of my understandings of my own spiritual journey, my own spiritual path. I began to find the answers as I developed more and more, or as I embraced more and more of my Norse culture, of my Norse ancestry. And so that began, I would say it actually expedited, it sped up my arrival at my Celtic Norse spiritual beliefs. Now, notice I don't use the word pagan and I don't use the word heathen, because I think those two terms don't apply to me. I believe in the old gods. I believe in Norse gods, Odin and Freya and Frigg and Thor and Tyr and those. And I'm willing to stand by them now against anything and anyone. I believe in the legends that my grandparents passed to me. Not because I'm in conflict with the church or my previous beliefs, but because this fills me. It makes my heart feel full. It makes me feel protected and safe in my beliefs. very critical that I was willing to put away my ego when I began transitioning from monotheism out of that understanding and that study. I fought, and sometimes very, very violently within my mind, the grasp that that practice had on me. And as I became more me, as I explored more of my Norse ancestry, I adopted more, more Danish dishes and decorations of my house and all the things that made me, that I felt connected to Denmark, and of course BRB. This process, this journey, felt comfortable. It felt right. Was it without conflict with others? No. When I first left the monotheistic practice, it was pretty rough. There were a lot of threats, a lot of hate, a lot of just really exclusion, forced to exile from those individuals who were part of that belief system. And it wasn't until I, and for quite a while as I left the church, I felt very poorly, very, very confused, very disorientated. I really didn't know which way to turn and which way to even look. I mean, I was really lost. Fortunately, at the same time, I was also investigating some genealogy from my mother, and it was this Norse culture, and certainly the Danish part of that settled with me, and I began to feel this fullness in my heart that I've yet to look back. I'm now fully committed to what I believe and what I understand and how I feel, and the courage to accept my emotional journey, which, by the way, is the same as my physical journey, which, by the way, is the same as my spiritual journey. This path that I have now traveled was necessary for me to fully understand the gravity of having the courage of my friend who, as I mentioned, came out back in the day before it was accepted. So these pieces of wisdom and knowledge have led me to believe that it is this belief in our hearts, when we can believe something and then become congruent to that belief in the way we speak, in the way we act, in the way we look, what is our perspective of the world. All of those things are driven by connecting our mind to our heart. We've mentioned before, we talk about emotional filters. The emotional filters that come with our authentic space and our living congruently, we now see things, our reality, the way we need to see them to support that. So if we're living and we believe in our heart of hearts that harmony with other life forms is paramount, one of the highest forms of love there is, and love does indeed rule all, above and beyond, crushes its competition. Love does conquer all. Love is the most important of all emotion. Loving ourselves, loving, family, friends. We talk about what's the difference between family and friends, the depth of the love that we have for each other, right? We have, and sometimes those two can kind of intertwine. I have many friends and colleagues which I've served with in either during my days in the military, during my days in the fire department, during the days of certainly my monotheistic journey, and now my non-monotheistic journey. All of these groups I maintain friendships with today. But now I don't feel threatened by them. I know what I believe. Why? Because not only do I think it, but I feel it. Right? So it has validation through this line of congruency. Right? Because validation means we simply hear or see for the second time a particular situation or event. When we see that the second time, it now becomes authentic. Seeing the first time, it could be a fluke, but seeing it the second time the same way, understanding it the same way, the second time, it becomes validated. So anything we're behaving, we're believing up here, when we hear it in our heart as well, then it becomes validated. So super important. I hope this makes sense. Now, you may say, well, this sounds all well and good, but sometimes being ourselves, we're ostracized from certain communities. Okay, you're right, you will be. But is that a bad thing? Because for every community or society that we're ostracized from, we'll find another one that we are not. We are welcomed with open arms. And this is the way life is, right? So we will find our homes, but don't live incongruently. Don't live our lives pretending to be something that we're really not, because that causes those divisions in the brain. Remember, that's what causes these little pieces of stress that build up and use up some of our bandwidth, so that when a large traumatic event occurs, we don't have the bandwidth anymore to process it, and we wind up causing physiological damage to us, to our friends, to our family. The list goes on. So live congruently. All right? I know you can, because you're here. And by being here, this is already means you've accomplished the first level and you're moving on up, right? So stay tuned. I wish you the very best Tears Day today. Remember, you, my friends, are super, super unique. And your uniqueness is what makes you beautiful. You're a beautiful part of this fabric that we call our communities, our societies, and life in general. All right? So you are important. Celebrate that. All right. We will see you again tomorrow when we celebrate Wotan's Day. Love and